Rolling.
Sure. When you have the culture that allows AOC to go to, to the Met Gala and say tax the rich and the rich are evil, they didn't earn it, let her take it all, while her buddy at the gala hasn't paid a lot of her income taxes or other taxes for years, but the culture says that's the right thing to do, well, then you can do anything you want because you have a common enemy. It's the guy who owns land. It's the guy who owns a farm. It's the guy who makes $1 million a year. It's the guy who owns a business. It's the guy who has employees. It's the guy who owns too many rentals. Once that guy or gal is the common enemy, well, why wouldn't you do anything to them? Why wouldn't it get worse? And it's the same thing that I see with the wealth tax. The wealth tax is, hey, one-time wealth tax. Well, of course, there's no such tax as a one-time tax. That's just the first one. Or, $20 million or more, you get a wealth tax. Then you turn and you look a little bit, and then it goes to 10 million. And I just kind of think this is a trend that they could look at more and more. We've mentioned over the last year or so numerous countries that are talking about this. This is the most egregious. It's a bad trend. And in cultures where someone who owns property is the enemy, I think this is the kind of slope that you're going to go down. This is why you want diversification. World economy awakens from a 15-month slumber caused by the pandemic. Deutsche Bank has launched a series of research articles to spark debate and discussion about pressing post-pandemic economic issues. On June 7th, Deutsche Bank issued its first report of the new series titled Inflation, the Defining Macro Story of This Decade. According to the report, U.S. macro policy and, indeed, the very role of government in the economy is undergoing the biggest shift in direction in 40 years. In turn, we are concerned that it will bring about uncomfortable levels of inflation. That could be deemed the understatement, considering that the U.S. economy is already experiencing uncomfortable inflation. Those have been the headlines recently, uncomfortable inflation. Consider, Chris Talgo says, based on the most recent inflation report from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics in April, the consumer price index for all urban consumers rose by 0.8%, rising 4.2% over the last 12 months. Now, why did I choose St. Lucia in particular? Because of that cost issue, and because I didn't see a substantial difference in the quality of the passports, and because I figured I would never live there, and because I had other citizenships that I felt and still do feel are tax-friendly as well. I felt like I didn't need to get a citizenship in a tax-free country. I had that already well covered with other parts of my plan. Other passports at the time were more expensive than they are now. You've seen some price wars happen since I made my choice. About the time I renounced U.S. citizenship, you started to see some of the hurricane discounts from like St. Kitts. I still would have gone with St. Lucia because I just didn't see the benefit in my particular situation. What I would say is for some people, spending an extra $30,000 in Antigua to have a tax-free country, or spending an extra $50,000 in St. Kitts to have a tax-free country is worthwhile. In my particular case, having already done stuff, it wasn't. And so it was Dominica versus St. Lucia. There was a little bit, I won't say of a bad taste in my mouth from Dominica. I think Dominica runs a very responsive citizenship by investment program, but I kind of like the fact that St. Lucia was not as good at promoting its program. They don't issue as many passports. They're not going around and promoting it as much. And so while that is why they don't still have, I would believe, visa-free travel to Russia, they haven't been as aggressive. I felt like for someone like me who was developing this passport portfolio, keeping the slightly more under the radar option would be better. Remember a couple years ago when the U.S. State Department came out and said, travel warning, every single country in the world is unsafe right now. Don't leave anywhere. No, if I had a government that took half of people's money and spent it on a bunch of stupid stuff, I guess I wouldn't want anyone to leave either. But of course there are places where you can go, you can get a better value, and you can also be safe. And so what I would tell you is, safe can be anywhere and cheap is subjective. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He lives in Chicago, and if you've seen some of the stuff that happens in Chicago, you'll have dozens of people some weekends being killed. I mean, really sad stuff. And he's very quick to point out, I don't live in the part of Chicago where people are being killed. I live in the suburbs. You don't have to worry about it. Look at Asia. You could look at places further afield in Europe. You could look at Eastern Europe. You could look further, south in South America. And I've talked about countries from Malaysia to Colombia to Georgia. Those could all work. We also have talked about countries like Switzerland, places like Jersey, the Cayman Islands, and we have high-level clients who want to live in those places. So there is no one perfect place for anybody. I'm sure most Americans could handle living in the Cayman Islands. Just happens the investment option to live there is generally a bit more intense or a bit more expensive. But there are lots of places where you can go. Those are four that the average American can start with. People still say, the U.S. best place to invest. Well, not according to the statistics. Australia, best place to live? Yes, if you live in Australia, I suppose. And again, even some people in our audience, which are supposed to be more freedom-minded, libertarian, are saying, hey, Andrew, again, why does this matter? Well, it matters because, again, like to me, yes, emergency. All right, 6 weeks, whatever. Is that ideal? No. But these guys are really dragging it out to where the world has reopened. I mean, you have entire countries. You go to Mexico, you go to Colombia right now. They don't even want to test to get in, right? And yet Australia, they say you can't go 5 kilometers. Which grocery store are you going to? This is not where the world is at right now. They are one of the most illiberal places in the world, and yet people will defend it. The courts, you think the courts are going to save you? I've told you time and time and time again, the courts are not going to come and save you. Private businesses are not going to come and save you. If you're in a country like this, it's a problem. Now, has there been any perfect country? Maybe not. But I would rather have a handful of places to pick from, and I would at least know what I'm getting into. I would at least rather have a country where they don't have the luxury of printing out currency because they actually have to run a proper economy. But today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to talk to people who are either just starting out, or perhaps you want to cut your costs all the way to the bone. Where would I live if I had $1,000 a month to live on? And I like to give thought to this every once in a while because we've talked about the idea of, for example, the lifetime emergency fund, how to put your money in offshore banks at higher interest rates and, kick off $1,000 a month in interest that you could go and you could live on, because there are places in the world that aren't too bad where you could go and actually do that. And as someone who's been an entrepreneur my entire life, I like to make sure that I'm not going to go back to there. And that's dictated my relatively risk-free or lower risk philosophy in life. So I've been helping some ultra high net worth individuals recently who have sold their businesses and built up a lot of liquidity in the form of simple cash in the bank or cash in a brokerage account. And they're looking to deploy that cash overseas, not only for asset protection or higher returns, but they're thinking maybe I can get a residence permit or a second citizenship just from putting that cash to work for me somewhere else. But not everyone is interested in buying real estate or investing in government bonds or starting a business overseas, which are many of the ways which allow you to get a residence permit or citizenship. So today I'm going to share with you some countries where just by moving your money to their country's banks, you can get residence and even citizenship. The issue is you're starting to see governments saying, hey, listen, if you don't do this, you're not going to get a passport. Is that allowed under international law? Is it allowed under the things that they've agreed to? Perhaps not, but guess what? They're doing it. This is what I've said about countries like the United States. Hey, it's great. All the Americans tell me, hey, we've got a constitution. Does where you're living have a constitution? Number one, generally yes. Number two, it's great to have a constitution. It's another thing for the politicians to follow it. And if they don't follow it, no one stops them. It's pretty much moot.
What you see on TV is Donald Trump you see in real life. So my wife Kim and I are sitting in his office, and Trump is talking about women in front of my wife Kim. And my wife Kim is a real woman. She's not a girly girl. And she says, I love that guy because he's a bad boy. And then, in the world there's 3 kinds of men: bad boys, nice guys, and wimps. Okay, so when you look at Trump on the stage, women either love him or hate him because he's a bad boy. Now, when you look at Biden, he's a wimp.